Afternoon, friends. I'm Tom Palmer from Atlas Network, and it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to day 2 of the African Liberty Forum. This grand opening session will feature a conversation between two active liberty leaders in Africa, Ibrahim Inoba, editor of AfricanLiberty.org, a rising scholar and author of a powerful series of studies on African libertarianism at libertarianism.org. Ibrahim is currently working on a major book on liberty in Africa. And Dr. George Ayittey, a well-established scholar, author, teacher, and visionary. George Ayittey has advanced our knowledge of institutions in Africa, not only through his lecturing as professor of economics at American University for 18 years, but through many journal articles and 8 important books. He's a senior fellow of Atlas Network and has been affiliated with the Hoover Institution of Stanford University and other learned societies and institutions. I've certainly learned a lot from him, starting from when we corresponded in 1988, and he wrote an eye-opening study of African economic institutions for a journal I edited. His earliest book-length study, African Indigenous Institutions, published in 1991, is rich with insights into Africa's homegrown systems of cooperation. And his latest book, published last year, is Applied Economics for Africa, a path-breaking economics textbook that could be used at Harvard or Oxford or the Sorbonne. In fact, a French edition is being prepared. Applied Economics for Africa is written from an African perspective with African examples. The book was sent to top economists and it got enthusiastic responses. Professor Jeffrey Myron of Harvard University called it essential reading. Nobel Prize winner Professor Thomas Sargent of New York University called it powerful and praised its remarkable clarity. Nobel Prize winner Professor Vernon Smith of Chapman University wrote, "This is African economics for Africans written by an African. The principles it teaches are universal and profoundly important. What makes it special and a winner is simplicity and clarity of style, abundantly illustrated in African contexts. Students can relate the text and lessons to their own lives and see how what they know and do in their economies combines with that of others to better the lives of all. Applied Economics for Africa is a winner." Now, before we tune into the conversation between Ibrahim Inoba and George Ayittey, I encourage everyone to open the chat feature of this webinar and to click on the link to download your own full copy of this remarkable book at zero price. I won't say it's free because it cost a lot of time and money and effort for our guest today to produce it, but the price for you is zero. And now to Ibrahim Inoba and George Ayittey.
Thank you, Prof, again for making time to join me for this discussion. And I was just reading your book, Applied Economics for Africa, yesterday, just to prepare for this interview. And I discovered that I actually had a lot of things that I didn't grab the first 2 times that I looked at the book.
There's a lot of information in that book.
Absolutely, it's just it's a whole package for any any African, not only interested in economics, but generally anyone interested in the idea of freedom or African institutions.
Yes.
Great. So, Prof, my first question to you is that it's going to be about the Cheetah Generation. As a matter of fact, the majority of the question I'm going to ask is about the Cheetah Generation. And in the penultimate chapter of your book, chapter 9, you extensively covered that set of Africans you refer to as the Cheetah Generation, or the so-called restless generation. And you gave example of people who you've met across the continent, doing businesses, creating business opportunities rather than seeing economic problems. And I want to ask you, do you have any other provisions as regarding the tools available to the Cheetah Generation besides business opportunities? I mean, we know business, of course, is key to a people emancipating themselves from the shackles of oppression. But are there any other opportunities besides businesses that you will admonish the Cheetah Generation to pursue?
Well, it's the kind of discovered them by default. By default, I mean that, throughout Africa, many of us look up to governments to solve our problems and to push the development agenda forward. But as you and I know, if you look at Nigeria, for example, governments have failed miserably. So there's a lot of frustration and, if I may say so, anger among some Africans who are simply fed up. Their leaders tell them making promises and promises which they don't follow through with the promises, and they simply fed up with these government promises. So in a way, they're not just going to sit there and wait for government. They have literally taken their own life into their own hands, their destiny into their own hands. And they wanted to push forward their own agenda. In so doing, push the agenda of their various respective countries. So, and I sort of met them by accident, like I said, by default, in my own ways of traveling through Africa. And I met these people. They are very young and they are intellectually agile and savvy, and they are computer savvy. And so I sort of tried to come up with a name for them. And I settled on the Cheetah Generation. Cheetah Generation because, the cheetah is an African animal. I didn't want to say that, these are the sort of the Asian tigers. It just doesn't fit. It's an African cheetah. And these cheetah are very fast, very agile. And sort of, it captures the spirit that I wanted to sort of portray about these Africans. And I met a couple of them, and then I interviewed them. And that's what I wrote about in my book. And I felt that Africa's salvation rests on the backs of these cheetahs. Now, these cheetahs, they are young generation. They are quite different, far more different from my generation of the 1970s and 60s. Our generation has failed Africa terribly. And I'd like to talk a little bit about my generation that I call the Hippo generation, those who are the ruling elite. Look, we went into government to make money. And that is where we went wrong, in the sense that, if you want to understand why Africa is poor and the US is rich, ask yourself, how do the rich in the two continents make their money? In the US, the richest person is, Warren Buffett. Bezos, the owner of Walmart. The man is worth more than $100 billion. But how did he make his money? He made his money, and Bill Gates, they all made their money in the private sector, producing something. So they have something to show for their wealth. Now let's go to Africa. Who are the richest in Africa? The richest in Africa are heads of state and ministers. How do they make their money? What do they produce to make their money? They made their money from the government sector by producing what? Nothing. They raise their wealth off the backs of their sovereign people. Take a look at Angola, the former president of Angola, Eduardo dos Santos. He was in power for 38 years, and he retired with $20 billion in personal fortune. How did he make his money? He's left the economy of Angola in tatters. Now, the Cheetah generation seeks to make their money in the private sector, not in the government sector or public sector. This is what distinguishes the Cheetah generation from my generation. My generation failed Africa, and that's why I am looking up to the Cheetah generation.
Great. And as you know, Prof, a lot of this so-called Cheetah generation are not only pursuing business opportunities. A lot of them are into policy advocacies, establishing think tanks. And a lot of them are actually my friends and partners. And oftentimes I get, convinced that we can do better than primarily focusing on economics or democracy or issues surrounding those two. I mean, there are a lot of issues that affect the African life, not only in economics or not only in democracy. So, Professor, what would you advise the so-called Cheetah Generation in the think tank sector as regards possible policy areas they can pursue that will better advance freedoms in Africa?
Well, you've asked a very good question, and it's not only just economics that or business that the Cheetah Generation should focus on, but I think what they need to understand is that the most critical and the most cardinal freedom that the Cheetah Generation should push for is the freedom of expression. It is guaranteed by Article 9 of Africa's own Human and People's Rights. Look, without freedom of expression, you're not going to be able to express your views. You're not going to be able to push for anything. And this is why that freedom is very critical. Freedom of expression, freedom of the media. Look, if there is a problem in Africa, you have to have the freedom of expression to expose it. You also need to have freedom of expression to debate solutions to that problem. So this is where I will advise the Cheetah Generation to push for freedom of expression. It's not a Western institution. It's even in our own traditional system, freedom of expression, as I just said, look, the Cheetah Generation could go to any traditional village meeting. You can criticize, you can disagree with the African chief. He's not going to arrest you and put you in jail. And that is why freedom of expression is very important. It's important. If you look at all those countries in the world, societies that advance are those that respect the freedom of expression. And the Cheetah Generation also need that freedom of expression to propagate their own ideas and also to find solutions to their problems. So freedom of expression is what I will stress to the Cheetah Generation.
Great. My third question for you, Prof, is that we recognize the fact that some problems across the continent are peculiar to specific African societies. Of course, there are general problems in Africa, which of course brings into question how or why solutions to African problems must be very much domesticated. But I want to ask, there is always the need for people like mine to collaborate cross-border. And the Cheetah Generation across Africa today, especially those involved in the policy advocacies, are not really, too much like that, so to speak. So what would you advise to be the best way for them to collaborate cross-border or to join efforts in promoting freedoms across their nations?
I think, the most important thing is communication among them. It's very, very important for them to share experiences and the challenges that they face. And as you know, one of the ways by which we can do this, okay, look, they can meet physically, but they can also meet online by, I'm proposing that we have something like a Cheetah forum where, it's like an internet talk forum where the cheetahs can belong to and they can talk among themselves, they can share experiences and so forth. Now, another forum that I'll propose I'll suggest is that every year we have an annual Cheetah conference. Maybe we can have one in Lagos and then the next one in Ghana, Accra, or Dakar, or Nairobi, and then in Johannesburg, so that we can circulate around the continent and then share experiences. I think that will be very, very good. And this is what I would suggest that, you need to have something like a cheetah sort of board, which can, a place where, or a board which can sort of put all these things together, have a cheetah forum, cheetah conferences. Maybe we can also have cheetah times, maybe a newspaper or something like that. But there is a way by which, these are simply ways by which you can have the cheetahs interact among themselves, communicate among themselves. I think this will be a very good step in collaborating among the cheetahs.
Great. So I want to take you back a little bit. In 2012, if I'm correct, you published a review of Chinua Achebe's "The Gods Are Not to Blame." Also, one of the book by Achebe and perhaps by showing Kato in the Wall Street Journal, and you identify a critical problem in their view of the African experience, especially using the African experience to move Africa towards the development projects you propose. And one of the key problems you identified is the fact that Achebe and others sort of align with the idea of negritude, which of course you understand try to rejuvenate African values in socialism or extreme socialist principles. And of course, you said that is a very key undoing of Achebe and others, even though they are actually remarkable literary scholars. So we've seen this problem sort of reemerge in today Africa, and majority of my colleagues that do not subscribe to my philosophical view would often say, for Africa to move forward, they need to reinclinate their cultures or their solutions for economic problems in African socialism or negritude or those socialist, communist leaning philosophies. So, Professor, I know you also said this is a key problem. You've reiterated this numerous times. What would be your advice to these African cheaters that seem to affiliate or lean towards the negritude, African socialism, or African communism side of the philosophical spectrum?
No, I think, this is a very good question. I think what happened was that there were many African leaders who went abroad and copied foreign ideologies like socialism and Marxism and came to Africa and try and find African behavioral actions and acts to try and support those foreign ideologies. One typical example was African socialism. They said Africans, they looked at Africa and they saw that the African theological concept, like I said, the American would say, I am because I am, and I can damn well do anything I want at any time. And but the African says, I am because we are. The we connotes community, and African community pull their resources together and they share things and to do things. The leaders like Nyerere and Nkrumah saw that the Africans pull their resources together, they share things, and therefore they were ready for socialism, which was completely wrong. When the African says we share things and pull our resources together, it is the clan, the extended family, acts as a unit. The extended family shares things among themselves, but the extended family is not a tribal government. It is a private entity. Now, as a private entity, they can do whatever they want. That doesn't mean that it is the government which is dictating things to them. So socialism as an economic ideology is totally alien. The most important thing in traditional Africa is that there were free markets in Africa that were there before the colonialists set foot in the continent. Anybody anybody could enter into any occupation that they want. They didn't have to lie before the chief's palace or chief's hut for permission to engage in trade. So there was free trade free enterprise in Africa before the colonialists came. This is what Africans should return to and build upon these various institutions instead of going abroad to copy foreign ideologies and bring it to impose upon their people. Now, this copying hasn't stopped. Right now, African leaders are building Confucius institutes. So far, they have built 54 of them across the continent. We are not Chinese.
Well, well said. And Prof, that's a very somber note for us to reflect on as I will bring the interview to a close. And thank you again for taking time to speak with us. And we will.
Okay. You see, guys, I've talked to Professor Ayittey numerous times, and I think one thing that you get when you talk to Professor Ayittey is like you have an African elder, an African chief, an African professor, and you have all these three individuals combined in one. And not only that, this individual have traveled across the continent. You've seen the continent go through the so-called beauty of decolonialism or decolonization, and he was there when the country was going through the ordeal of militarization. And he was also there witnessing firsthand the continent being baby-fed by the so-called Bretton Woods institution, and he has also taught across the world. And when you have this one individual producing what is a remarkable piece of work, what do you get? You're gonna get a piece of literature, because I view it like that, or a piece of textbook that will address these problems from a unique experience of an elder, experience of an African chief, an experience of a professor. That's exactly what you get with applied economics for Africa. And I've read the book a couple of times, and I think what I will say is the number one observation for me is that the book tends to address what I regard to be the decolonization of economics in Africa, or can we just say the decolonization of knowledge in Africa? You know, as a historian, there is something we pursue vigorously, and that's called the decolonization of history. We know that African history was first written by colonialists, imperialists. And if you want to research, say for instance, 17th century African history or 18th or 19th century African history, for you to come to a very strong thesis or dissertation, you have to go to the British Library or go to the French Library, because they were the first people that actually wrote vigorously, extensively about African history. And you can imagine if your own history or your own economic history is being written by, somebody that was supposed to colonize you. So you can have an honest piece of evidence that regard what happened with your ancestors in the past. And that's exactly what you get in African economic departments. I mean, I took some economic courses while in undergrad in Ogun State, and a couple of times I will go to the economics library, and all I could find, or would generally find, would be textbooks from Marxist scholars. I'll be lucky to get anyone from liberal or classical liberal scholars. And these, even if you get some from classical liberal scholars, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, because these textbooks, as beautiful as they are, some of them are very beautiful. They tend to submerge the African reality and experiences under European realities, and you really can't fault the authors. I mean, you have individuals like Smith or Ricardo writing based on European experiences, and you have this textbook for African students to read. So you can't really blame Smith or Ricardo. It's because they were writing with their own experiences in mind. So what happened to the African experience? Well, you have a textbook that addressed that need. It's a textbook that address African realities from it's a university level textbook, just to say the least. In this important book, you have Professor Ayittey describing the deep history of market exchange in African societies. And he critically explained that a free and prosperous continent would depend not only on importing socialist ideas from abroad, but on building upon Africa's own indigenous heritage participatory democracy and are based upon consensus, village markets and free enterprises. And this is what Professor Ayittey have spoken about throughout his whole industrial career. And imagine all these ideas put in one textbook for you. Well, that's not the whole beauty of it. I'm still going to come back to that in the head of my presentation. But the remarkable thing is that this textbook is a different contribution to the body literature on African economics. Quite very, very remarkable. And it's an above and beyond textbook. And you really, really enjoy it, even if you are not an economics major or economics minor. I mean, I only took economics in my first 2 years, and I enjoy reading the book because not only does the book go as far as identifying economic realities in Africa or providing solutions to these economic problems, you have a textbook that is also talking about the military experience in Africa, the political process in Africa, how we need to look inwards and look at indigenous systems to help us understand how to help Africa move forward. And the beauty of it is that you can download this textbook for free on our website, africanliberty.org/applied economics. Or you can just go on the website and do a website search by searching for applied economics. Or you can go on Google and search for applied economics for Africa. And of course, it's not a free textbook, but it's available for you at zero price. A lot of work goes into producing a textbook, as I'm coming to realize. A lot of work goes into producing a textbook. It's a beautiful textbook. You have to pay $0 or 0 naira or 0 CD. Just go to the website, africanliberty.org/applied economics, and you get a book for free. It's a remarkable textbook, 400 plus pages. So I won't say too much about the textbook. As the Yoruba would say, painting a picture too beautiful might take the actual beauty of the picture. You just have to see it for yourself. And to see it for yourself, just go to africanliberty.org/applied economics for Africa. So with that, I will bring this session to a close. And after this session, we'll have a pair of concurrent sessions that start at exactly 11:45 a.m. Ghana time. That should be about 10 minutes thereabout away from here. So you have roughly 10 minutes or 12 minutes to get a cup of coffee if you are on the East Coast, or to get a bowl of kenke and shito if you're in Ghana. Although I still try to get my taste bud around the spiciness of shito, a beautiful, beautiful African sauce. And the next session, of course, the concurrent session, will be featuring some of our good friends, Casey Pfeiffer from Atlas Network, Patrick Stevenson, a good friend of ours at African Liberty, is with Imani Africa, and Sud Adani from the Arab Center for Research in Morocco, and Bruce Villon from the CDE in Burundi. So guys, we will see you at exactly 11:45 a.m. Ghana time. Please join us there. Now you can also find the link to those concurrent sessions in the chat box, or alternatively check your email and follow the Zoom link provision in the email. And thank you again. It's been a pleasure addressing you, and I will see you in the next 10 minutes.